Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in the Hamilton's Mythology lectures. This is lecture number 5 of Hamilton's Mythology, part 2. Here we're going to talk about chapter 5, the story of Cupid and Psyche, and then in chapter 6 we're going to have 8 other brief tales of lovers. That is to say, we're going to have now in our lecture, and if you want you can kind of highlight what it is we're about to do by pointing out to yourself that this will be the 9 stories that Hamilton will emphasize of lovers and love. Although we're going to have to comment, and we'll say it several times in this lecture, drawing distinctions maybe between love and lust as we go through this. In part 2 of Hamilton's Mythology, which we are about to meet, we get stories of love and adventure. And as we say, we'll start with these 9 stories first, and some of these you will know. Some of these actually you will have heard of. You just didn't know that you knew the story and the way in which it's told. Now, hey, just to remind, I recommend that you hit learnstrong.net. If you haven't done it, watch my intro lecture number 1. In lecture number 2, we talk about the gods and the different gods and goddesses as they're outlined. And then finally in chapter 3, we do the Demeter Dionysius lecture. And then in chapter 4, the last lecture, we talk about the cosmogonic myths, those origination stories, as well as earliest hero stories. Now again, just because we've given the suggestion before, let me give it again. I highly recommend that you first of all read and annotate on your own in those 3 levels of reading. What does the text say? Level 1, what does the text mean? Level 2, 2A, messages, themes. 2B, rhetoric, not what is said, but how it's said. And then finally in the 3rd level, how can I relate to this text? 3A, relate to other texts that I know of or to the world at large. And then finally relate 3B to myself. Why? Because in learning theory in 303, again, just to remind, we always say we are always attempting to connect new information to old information. We call that learning. Now, let's turn to these chapters and do our 3 levels with each of the 9 stories. And at level 2B, for this series of comments, I'm going to be lecturing on symbols, important symbols, one thing which represents something else. And as we get into this, we'll focus on at least one important symbol from each of the texts. Now again, the primary question that we will be addressing in these series of comments has to do with the question of love. The Greeks were very interested in this idea, but we're going to ask if there is a distinction between love and lust, or do you see them as kind of the same thing? It seems that the Greeks maybe felt that you have to have lust first to have love, or a desire of a kind. We'll get into it. Let's turn now to part 2, chapter 5. This is the Cupid Psyche story. It will maybe sound familiar for you. Cupid is a fascinating god. In Hesiod's theogony, there is some sense that Cupid is maybe right there at the very beginning. In other words, the Greeks will believe that love is a part of, from the very beginning, we said this in an earlier lecture, from the very beginning, love is a powerful force in the history of the world. Let's get into it. A king has 3 daughters. This will sound very familiar to as a motif. The youngest, Psyche, is the most beautiful. Again, a very common motif. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, is jealous of the beauty of Psyche and tells Cupid, her son, I want you to jack her. And when Cupid gets ready to do this, he looks at Psyche and he's like, oh my goodness, she's so stunningly beautiful. But he kind of curses her in some way so that nobody will marry her. And ultimately the father is concerned. He goes to Delphi, he asks the oracle of Apollo there, and is told, you must sacrifice, with obviously Cupid is behind all of this, you must sacrifice your daughter to a scary snake. Now again, this sacrificing of daughters by daddies is a very old motif. We'll meet it again with the sacrifice of Iphigenia, Agamemnon's daughter. We, of course, if we're students of Hamlet, we know that Hamlet will make a comment to the old man, what is your daughter? Is your daughter dear to you? And of course, it mentions Jephthah, the story out of the Bible, and so you have this notion, this motif, right? That you've always got this kind of old man who is ready to sacrifice his daughter, the father ready to sacrifice his daughter, for the advancement or whatever. Well, this is what happens on a mountain. Then Psyche is left. And Cupid comes along and picks her up and takes her to a beautiful temple, and he says to her, "We can live together. We can be lovers, but you can never look at me. This will be the key." Well, they have a great life together, although she never gets to see him. She knows that he's there. But Psyche has two sisters, and these two sisters come along and they begin to tempt Psyche, and it's at this point that we will turn actually in the text itself for just a line, and they ask questions. Who is this? How do you know that you're not actually married to a disturbing, ugly, hideous snake? You should look at him even though he has said you should never look. Away the sisters went, and we're told Psyche was torn by doubt and distracted what to do. She loved him. He was her dear husband. No, he was a horrible serpent, and she loathed him. She would kill him. She would not. She must have certainty. She did not want certainty. So all day long her thoughts fought with each other. When evening came, however, she had given the struggle up. One thing she was determined to do. She would see him. And in fact, this is exactly what she does. She sneaks in, and she will want to look at him. Of course, she's bringing the hot oil of the lamp with her, right? And she looks at him, and he's stunningly beautiful. He's amazing, right, beauty. But then, of course, the hot oil drips on him. He awakens, and then he rushes away. And Edith Hamilton points out that the final comment is, "Love cannot live where there is no trust," he says. "Love cannot live where there is no trust." And off he goes. She, of course, now is jacked. She is in love with Cupid. She longs to be with Cupid, but Cupid no longer will be with her because of the betrayal of trust. We then will have a series of interesting tests. Psyche will go to the shrine of Aphrodite and will say, "I need help here." She, of course, is going to give a series of tests that ultimately will kill her rival. Because why? Well, Aphrodite is a beautiful woman, and the last thing she wants is a rival. And so she will say, "I will give you a series of tests to just prove how much you actually love Cupid." In these tests, fascinatingly, each time Psyche will be helped by something non-human. Let's play through this one really quickly. First of all, she gives her 1,000,000 seeds to separate, all these different types of seeds, separate them out into each individual seed. Without the help of an ant, she couldn't do it, but an ant helps, done. The second one, there are these beautiful sheep, but they are dangerous, but they have this golden fleece. Get me some of the fleece. And she is able to do this with the help of a reed that says, if you'll wait, these sheep go through these thistles, and the fleece will come off. In the third test, water from sticks in Hades. This is, of course, always dangerous business going into Hades. And here an eagle will help her. In the fourth test, go down to Hades and talk to the beautiful Persephone and have her put some of her beauty in a box and bring it back to me. A tower here helps, giving even the suggestion of some cake so that Cerberus, the three-headed watchdog, is fed. Unfortunately, though, the fifth test, you could say, is kind of a different type of test, because she, Psyche, looks in the box. And, of course, like Pandora, then will have problems falling asleep. Ultimately, Cupid, however, is impressed with her love. He scolds her for her curiosity. And finally, there's the question, is it possible that maybe she can become a goddess and live on the mountain of Olympus with the other gods and goddesses? The final lines here then, so all came to a most happy end. Love and the soul, for that is what Psyche means, had sought, and after sore trials, found each other, and that union could never be broken. Well, we think here in the story at 2a, the major message theme here, love, obviously has to endure all kinds of tests. At 2b, the symbol is obviously the fire, the burning of the wax, which drops on Cupid and wakes him up. The thing that gives you away. We've sometimes pointed out this is kind of like the Freudian slip when you say something and you don't mean to, and of course it gives you away. Of course, think about the fire is burning, right? And think about the power of love. At 3a, how we're going to relate this to other texts. Obviously, Pandora comes to mind, and other texts of love as well, right? And the whole notion of as well, whether love can stand through the tempest. Think about Sonnet 116 of Shakespeare, right? Oh no, it's an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempest and is never shaken. It's the star to every wandering bark whose worth sun on all those height be taken. That famous sonnet of love in Sonnet 116 of Shakespeare. We've given a set of comments on that one. At 3b, well, this is an interesting question. Do you think true love is easy or is it hard? You'll remember that in Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, there's that notion of the course of true love never did run smooth. And should true love be easy? Like there's no working at it at all. It's an interesting question. In chapter 6 now, we're going to turn to 8 more brief tales of love. We'll go through each of these quickly, right, and take a few notes. Our first story is the Pyramus and Thisby story. This is a famous story. Some of you know this story maybe without realizing that it's Pyramus and Thisby. They grow up side by side. They have a common wall in the backyard. They love each other. There's only a hole or a chink there for them to be able to converse. They decide that they will still love in spite of the wall, and they decide to escape as young people to the tomb of Ninus. They will go there next to the mulberry bush, which is all white, we are told originally. There they will meet. Thisby gets there first. She is waiting for Pyramus. She sees a lioness who has just killed something and has blood all over its mouth. She turns, she runs away, she drops her cloak to get away. The lion chases and finds the cloak, bites on the cloak. Of course, when Pyramus shows up, he assumes the bloody cloak means that his Thisby has been eaten by a lion, and of course he is sad. He goes over to the mulberry tree. He stabs himself there. The blood from him goes to the mulberry bush, which is why it's no longer white but now red. And of course, Thisby will come back searching for him, and she can't find the mulberry tree because it's now red. When she finally realizes what has happened, then she herself is ready to kill and end her own life as well. We'll read just a few lines of this one because it's so much fun. She, Thisby, saw the sword fallen from his hand, and beside it her cloak stained and torn. She understood all. Her own hand your own hand killed you, she said, and your love for me. I too can be brave. I too can love. Only death would have had the power to separate us. It shall not have that power. Now, she plunged into her heart the sword that was still wet with his life's blood. The gods were pitiful in the end, and the lovers' parents too. The deep red fruit of the mulberry is the everlasting memorial of these true lovers, and one urn holds the ashes of the two whom not even death could part. Well, this, of course, notion of death overcomes all. Let's talk now messages at 2a. Lovers always try and find a way, right? No wall can keep them apart. Of course, at 2b, the symbol here is the bloody cloak. That is the deception that leads to death. At 3a, we think, of course, in the same line of Othello, Shakespeare's Othello. Think about that handkerchief, which is, of course, going to be the telltale sign for Othello. And, of course, it's all a setup by Iago. But most importantly and significantly in Shakespearean drama, we think, of course, of Romeo and Juliet, don't we, right? At 3b, it's an interesting question. You can write it down and consider it. Does love make people do crazy stuff, right? Does love make people do crazy stuff? All right, our second story is the famous Orpheus story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus is the great musician. He's the son of one of the muses and a Thracian prince. The Thracians were considered the most musical of all people. All the animals love his playing on his lyre. In one story, in fact, he sails with Jason and the Argonauts, a story that we'll get to in our next lecture, and he saves them from the Song of the Sirens by playing his music. He marries Eurydice. She is stung by a snake and dies and goes into the underworld. Of course, snakes and being stung by snakes is always going to be important in mythology, right, and in stories. Orpheus will go to Hades to rescue her. He will tempt everything. And in fact, we have some wonderful poetry in Hamilton's mythology. With my song I will charm Demeter's daughter. I will charm the Lord of the dead, moving their hearts with my melody. I will bear her away from Hades. He, Orpheus, dared more than any other man ever dared for his love. He took the fearsome journey to the underworld. There he struck his lyre, and at the sound all that vast multitude were charmed to stillness. The dog, Cerberus, relaxed his guard. The wheel of Axon stood motionless. Sisyphus sat at rest upon a stone. Tantalus forgot his thirst. For the first time the faces of the dead goddesses, the Furies, were wet with tears. The ruler of Hades drew near to listen with his queen. Orpheus sang. And then some more beautiful poetry. O gods who rule the dark and silent world, to you all born of a woman needs must know. All lovely things at last go down to you. You are the debtor who is always paid. A little while we tarry up on earth, then we are yours forever and ever. But I seek one who came to you too soon. The bud was plucked before the flower bloomed. I tried to bear my loss, I could not bear it. Love was too strong, God. O king, you know, if that old tale men tell is true, how once the flowers saw the rape of Persephone, then weave again for sweet Eurydice, life's pattern that was taken from the loom too quickly. See, I ask a little thing, only that you will lend, not give her to me. She shall be yours when her year's span is full. No one under the spell of his voice could refuse him anything. He drew iron tears down Pluto's cheek and made hell grant what love did seek. They decide, okay, fine. We'll let you take her, but on one condition. When you're leading her out of Hades, she will walk behind you, and you are not allowed to turn back and to see that she's there until you're completely out of Hades. Well, he agrees to the conditions, and as he's leading her out, of course, Orpheus one more time has to look back and see if Eurydice is there. And when he looks back, it's too soon, and he's not out of Hades yet. And as she reaches out her arms for him, and he reaches out his arms for her, the only thing ever mentioned is the word farewell. He loses his girl. Orpheus so sad that he is lost for a second time Eurydice, that all he can do is wander alone in the wilderness, in the woods, and play his music. There, everything pities him except for the Maenads, the worshippers of Bacchus, who will tear him apart limb from limb, maybe consumed with the music. They throw his head into the river Herbus, and there ultimately the muses will find his body and bury him at the foot of Mount Olympus. Well, at 2a, possible messages, themes here. Obviously, love attempts the impossible comes to mind, right? I would go to hell for you is the lyrics of a song or two, right? As well, we should point out that another major message is the power of music and art, right? At 2b, well, obviously the symbol here is the lyre, which suggests that music maybe is the greatest art. At 3a, well, we have the story, of course, in the biblical account of Lot's wife turning to look back at the burning of Sodom and Gomorrah and will turn into a pillar of salt, a very similar kind of storyline. The great German poet Rilke wrote a series of sonnets to Orpheus, it's called, and I would definitely suggest you take a look at those. Think about Milton's Paradise Lost. We've given lectures on Milton and Paradise Lost in our Harvard's Classics series. You'll maybe remember that in Book 7, Milton himself begins by calling on the muse to be like Orpheus and to be able to tell the story correctly. At 3b, the question now is, of course, is, in your estimation, music the greatest of all the arts? It's an interesting question. All right, let's go to story number 3 now. This one is the story of Ceyx and Alcyone. Alcyone and Ceyx. Ceyx is the king of Thessaly. He's the son of Lucifer, the light bearer, the star that brings day. Alcyone is the daughter of Helios, the king of the winds. And they're lovers, and they're devoted to each other. Ceyx, however, has some concerns, and so he wants to travel to the oracle, and he's going to do it alone. She says, no, I am definitely going with you, because I know about the ocean, and I know about those nasty winds. You won't go alone. He says, no, it's too dangerous. I'm going by myself. And of course, Ceyx drowns because of a storm. But right before he dies, he says that he's happy that he gets to die alone and not have Alcyone with him to die. In other words, he wants to protect her. She is sent a vision in a dream that Ceyx, her lover, is dead. She goes down to the ocean. She finds his body there. She's ready to drown herself in sorrow. But instead, she's changed into a bird, along with Ceyx, who is also changed into a bird, and they live together. The point that Edith Hamilton makes is that because of this changing into the bird, then Alcyone becomes calm, and that there are the 7 calm days every year, called the halcyon days, when the birds float on the calm sea. Well, in 2a, of course, this idea of love always wanting to protect the other. Notice that Ceyx is happy that Alcyone is not with him when he is drowning, because he saved her, he protected her. At 2b, well, this is a famous symbol in mythology, isn't it? The symbol of the bird. It can symbolize love, it can symbolize freedom, release from cares, it can symbolize steadfastness as well, of course. At 3a, all the texts that you can think of about love and birds, we think about, for example, in 303, that famous Boccaccio's text from the Decameron, Federico's Falcon, the Jack the Bird story of all Jack the Bird stories, right? And finally, at 3b, what are your thoughts about such love as this? Do you think it's true that the most important kind of love is the love that says, I would protect you above myself, I would even sacrifice myself for you and for your happiness? Well, let's pause there for just a moment, and we'll come back here in a few moments to finish with story number 4 and the famous Pygmalion story. Thank you.